Hey, thanks for joining us here once again on Strictly Speaking on True Blue. I'm Bob Frantz, and today we are going to look at one of the most radical politicians to ever come down the pike in the United States of America. She happens to be in charge of the Democratic ticket in the 2024 election. Trevor Loudon is an author and a filmmaker and a public speaker from New Zealand, and for more than 30 years, he has researched radical left Marxist and terrorist movements and their covert influence on mainstream politics. He's best known for his book, Enemies Within, Communists, Socialists, and Progressives in the U.S. Congress, and his similarly themed documentary film, Enemies Within. Perfectly timed with this upcoming presidential election and the ascendance of Kamala Harris to the top of the Democratic ticket, Trevor also has a new book coming out called simply Kamala Harris's Communist Roots. What does it all add up to? That's what we're here to discuss today with Trevor Loudon here on Strictly Speaking. Trevor, thank you so much for joining us here. How are you?
Oh, great. I'm great. Thanks, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's so good to have you. You've got a pinned tweet on your Twitter feed, which we have on the screen right now, at Trevor Loudon, the number one, that grabbed me a few weeks back when I saw it after Kamala Harris was crowned as the de facto nominee for the Democratic Party. And I watched that and I was astounded by how much detail you had through all of your research into not just Kamala Harris's personal political ideology today, but what she was raised in. It was extraordinarily insightful, and I thought we need to do a much deeper dive than you were able to do in a 23-minute video. So here we are, and I appreciate you diving with us now. So, Trevor, let's start out at the very beginning because it matters. Tell us about Kamala Harris's parents. Who were they? And how did who they were in the 1960s affect the way they raised now the Democratic nominee for president of the United States?
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, her mother was Shyamala Gopalan, an Indian breast cancer researcher from a very left-wing family in southern India. Very, very radical family. Her father was Don Harris. He's Jamaican, black Jamaican economics professor. They met, the two of them met at Berkeley in the early 60s. And they were involved in the African American Association. It sounds quite benign, but it was an ultra radical group that worshipped Mao Zedong and Fidel Castro and the African revolutionaries and Central American revolutionaries. And that group actually spawned the Black Panther movement, which was a pro-Chinese, pro-North Korean communist group. A lot of people don't quite understand that about the Black Panthers. And so Kamala
I never
was
knew
raised.
that. I apologize. I'm going to try to get as much info on these things about it as we go as I can. I didn't know that until I, saw that at part of your video until we spoke previously. Most people think of the Black Panther Party as just being Black liberation, Black power,
Yeah,
Black justice, and so on and so forth. I didn't know about the communist Marxist Chinese ties at all. And that is who her parents were involved with right from the start.
right from the start. Their group spawned the Black Panthers, that organization. And it's interesting. The head of that little organization was Donald Warden, who later became Khalid al-Mansour. He converted to Islam, and he worked for a Saudi sheikh. And in the late 70s, I think it was, he prevailed on the Manhattan borough president, Percy Sutton, who came from a Texas Communist Party family, to write a letter of recommendation for a young Barack Obama to get into Harvard. So what I'm talking about is a movement. This isn't just Kamala. This is a movement. So the Black Panthers, the Afro-American Association, they were Maoists. The Black Panthers made several trips to North Korea, to China, to North Vietnam. They were very openly pro-Mao Zedong, but that's really been sanitized from today's history. And we see the same thing with Black Lives Matter, which is the modern iteration of that, which is also a Maoist pro-Chinese group. But how many Americans do you think understand that? Understand
Well,
that?
we got a little clue on that one when the one of the co-founders, and I don't know if it was Patrice Cullors or Colors, however you say her last name, or the other one that you spoke of, but one of them declared during 2020 and during the Black Lives Matter, riots and then the rising, that they were trained Marxists. They
Yeah.
literally said we were trained classical Marxists that believe in, the destruction of the Western nuclear family, and so on and so forth. So that was the first taste that we got. That again, this isn't just about a racial justice movement, that this is much deeper and goes much further into communist and Marxist ties.
Yeah, look. See, the old Soviet communism was all about the class struggle. The workers will rise up and take the wealth of the capitalists. But that doesn't work very well in America because people are very socially mobile here. There's not a class divide in America. You can start in one class and move to the other, or you go up and down very easily. But race is always with us. So the pro-Chinese communists, during the 60s, there was a big build-up of pro-Chinese communists in this country through the Vietnam War. The young radicals, they didn't like the Soviet Union anymore. They loved China. They loved Cuba. They loved the Third World revolutionaries and Ho Chi Minh and North Korea and the Sandinistas. And this is the milieu that she came out of. And those people were very race focused because they understood that racial warfare was a better way to bring about revolution in America than the old class struggle. They didn't totally abandon class struggle, but their emphasis was much more on race. Kamala Harris is a race-based communist. That's where she comes from. It's all about using race to bring about revolution.
So that's a very interesting backgrounder, and we're going to skip to present day for a second before we go back and talk about that entry into politics and her associations and so forth. Because right now, today, in this period of time, the time we're recording, we're about a little under 100 days away from the election, but race is an issue one day and it's not another day. In other words, Kamala Harris, when she came into the Senate, well, I'm the first Indian American senator, a woman senator. And everybody talked about that aspect. Nobody talked about the Jamaican or Black part of her. She was Indian American and therefore, transformative in that regard. But now that she's not running for just California, she's running a nationwide race and she's running against Donald Trump. Suddenly her Black side has to be emphasized, and they're focusing on her Jamaican father and saying that she's a Black woman. So it's funny how race is supposed to matter at some points in time in her political career, and be completely ignored in other times, isn't it?
Well, that's because in California, the Black vote isn't greatly important, but nationwide it is. California blacks are a very small minority compared to, Latinos and whatever, even probably smaller now than the Asian Americans. So it's not a big focus in California, or in some parts it is, but not nationwide, not statewide, but it is in America. Democrats rely on the Black vote to get elected. That's why they freak out about Donald Trump, because he has been steadily eroding that loyalty to that Black loyalty to the Democratic Party base. That's why she's emphasizing the Black part to try and bring, the Black women and young people back on board with the Democratic Party.
Okay, so when you say she's a race-based communist again, is she using her race as a part of advancing her communist agenda, or is it incidental?
Oh, it's 100%. Look, Obama was chosen by the same Maoist clique that chose Kamala Harris and chose Andrew Gillum, who was the young Black man who almost won the governorship of Florida. They chose Stacey Abrams, the Black woman who almost won the governorship of Georgia, and they also chose Cory Booker, who's now the senator from New Jersey. These were all chosen by the same clique, and race was the main focus. See, this is the argument, and I'll go into the Rainbow Coalition a bit later. The
We'll
modern
get there. Yeah.
Democrat and communist philosophy in America now is to win using the Jesse Jackson Rainbow Coalition strategy of the 80s. Now, that came from the Black Panthers. Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panthers in Chicago in the 70s, set up his Rainbow Coalition. He got the white radicals and the black radicals and the brown radicals working together. There's only three colors, but that was his rainbow. Jesse Jackson, when he ran for president twice in 1984 and 88, expanded that, the Rainbow Coalition. You get the white radicals, brown radicals, black radicals, yellow radicals, and this is his terminology, not mine. The red radicals for the Native Americans, lavenders for the gays, greens for the environmentalists. You get all the minority interests together to form a majority. That is the thing. So you run left-wing candidates of color to energize the progressive base. The Democrats don't worry about the middle voter anymore. They've blown off their middle base. It's all about the minorities now, which is why they're encouraging illegal immigration to get more minorities to bring into their coalition. It's a race-based philosophy.
Tie those colors and those ethnicities and so on and so forth, these oppressed and marginalized groups that make up that rainbow you're talking about, tie that to communism. How does that play into Chinese communism and to Mao worship and so forth?
Well, I just go back. The Rainbow Coalition, Jesse Jackson, was run mainly by Maoist groups: Line of March, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, League of Revolutionary Struggle, Communist Workers' Party. See, up until the 60s, the old pro-Soviet Communist Party USA used to be the main communist party in America. But in the 60s, with the Vietnam War, the kids all turned to Maoism. And Mao was race-focused because, see, in China, you didn't have an industrial working class. You didn't have unions. You didn't have factory workers who could come out and take the wealth of the bosses. What you had was peasants and ethnic minorities. So Mao made his communism focused on racial and ethnic divisions. And that was brought into America by the American Maoists. So you look at the Aztlan movement, the movement of some Latinos to bring the southern states of America back to Mexico. That's a Maoist movement. Some of the Maoists were wanting to set up a black republic in the southern states of America, the Republic of New Africa. That's where Benny Thompson came from, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. That was a Maoist movement. The Asian American movement, the movement for reparations for Japanese prisoners during World War II, completely organized by the Maoists. So the Maoists come up with this idea that all racial minorities are oppressed by the white capitalist majority. The only way you get justice is by overthrowing the white Christian capitalist patriarchy. So before it was just the workers who would overthrow the capitalists. Now it's the oppressed peoples of color, black people, Latinos, Native Hawaiians. The Hawaiian independence movement is a Maoist movement. And
Right.
so they're using those racial minorities to coalesce them together to form a force that can win elections and, when necessary, start riots and run election campaigns. That's what Black Lives Matter was. It was a Maoist operation to intimidate conservative voters and judges, burn down cities, and create a massive sense of grievance amongst young blacks and Latinos. Trump's a racist, Republicans are Nazis. The only way you get justice is voting for Biden-Harris. So it's a manipulation of racial differences and an exacerbation, a deliberate exacerbation of racial differences, creating a sense of injustice that can then be exploited for revolutionary purposes.
Very interesting and thorough background on all of those organizations that are Maoist and started with Maoist organizations, does that mean that all of the beneficiaries of them are Maoists, are Marxists, are communist? Gillum,
No,
Booker, Abrams, the people you talked about who
oh,
benefited, are they?
they all are, absolutely. You know, they are. Stacey Abrams is a complete Marxist. Andrew Gillum trained at a Marxist training school in Oakland, California in 2012 for a whole year. Um, Barack Obama has a Marxist pedigree like you would not believe. And they are, and Cory Booker was very connected to the Maoist movement at Stanford University. So, yes, absolutely.
Seems like
They
the
know what
Bay
they're doing.
Area is the hub. Is the Bay Area the hub of the Marxist movement here? Because you mentioned
Well, the
Kamala as a
Maoist movement, yeah.
the
The
Maoist movement.
Maoist,
Okay,
because look, it's San Francisco's Chinatown, you see.
yeah,
So
sure.
That's the biggest Chinese center on the West Coast, the most influential Chinese center on the West Coast. And originally, Chinatown used to be very pro-Taiwan, very anti-communist. Many of them had fled from communist China. But in the 1970s, Maoist Chinese students set up the Chinese Progressive Association, which is like a community organization. They do get out the vote, they do community stuff, typical Maoism, you know, serve the people. But you cannot get elected in San Francisco without the blessing of the Chinese Progressive Association. They run that town, and they've been able to spread their Maoist influence right through the Bay Area into Sacramento, into Los Angeles, and into Washington, D.C. So that well, or the this and the other factor is the Soviets had a long time connection to the Bay Area too, because you got a Soviet consulate there, you had a Chinese consulate there, and you've got Stanford University, one of their main recruiting grounds, and you had the Longshore Workers Union, the most powerful union on the West Coast, which was completely controlled by the Communist Party. So the Bay Area has always ruled California more than Los Angeles because that was the center of California communism.
Wow, that's a fascinating revelation. So let's go back there now to San Francisco in the Bay Area, 70s and 80s style in Willie Brown, because everybody, you know, we're talking about the woman who may be the president of the United States 6 months from now. You know, that's the reality of it in January of 2025. Um, the internet has jokes about her and Willie Brown, and that's fine. The fact that she was a 30-year-old aspiring
20,
politician,
29, 29.
29, having a sexual relationship with a 60-year-old married man means that she was getting something out of this, and it was a lot more than money. What did Willie, first of all, who was Willie Brown at that time, and why was he the linchpin to getting Kamala Harris launched?
Yeah, look. Willie Brown was long separated from his wife when that relationship happened. So you know he was a single guy effectively. So
A single 60-year-old.
yeah, well, I know. I'm not interested in their love life. They can do what they want. The point is, Willie Brown was one of the leading communist supporters in the Bay Area for 50 years. Nobody has brought this out. Willie Brown was elected in the early 1960s with the help, first elected with the help of the W.E. Du Bois Club, the Communist Party's youth wing. He worked very heavily with Bob Truhaft, one of the leading communists of the area, who just happened to give a young Hillary Clinton her first job out of law school, by the way. And then he worked with communists like Carlton Goodlett. Um, he had, Willie Brown was completely in bed with the communist movement for 50 years, including for several years after his relationship with Kamala. He was still sponsoring Communist Party dinners in the Bay Area in 1998, 2000, 2001, 5 or 6 years after his relationship with Kamala. And then he veered off more to being Communist China's main friend in the Bay Area. He and Dianne Feinstein and Rose Pak, a local Chinese legend in the area, a complete Chinese agent, were the three best friends of Communist China in the Bay Area. You know, Dianne Feinstein had a Chinese spy in her office for 20 years, her office manager, not her driver. She was the one who got China into the World Trade Organization, which made China from a fourth-rate economic power to a first-rate economic power. So Willie Brown is a hardcore Communist Party supporter since the 1950s. So and he gave Kamala Harris a couple of very nice jobs that pulled her about a couple of $100,000 over 3 or 4 years for one meeting a month. Those sort of on some obscure board. He got her a lot of money, and he really launched her career. So, but this is a pattern with Kamala Harris. Everywhere she goes, she works with communists. Even her first job as an intern when she was at college was with Alan Cranston, the senator from California, the most pro-communist senator in the country at the time, with deep ties to the Soviet Union and the Communist Party. Everywhere she leapfrogged to, there was a communist to help her, a communist to work for, a communist to fund her, a communist to date her, whatever it was. They were all communists. There's no exceptions.
How did she find her way? How did she find her way to these individuals? I mean, did she join the communist network? Is that the way that worked? Did her parents
she was brought up in it. As an elementary school.
But she was brought up in it in Montreal, though, right? Too. That's where she spent.
She spent a few years in Montreal, but before she went to Montreal, she was part of. She used to go along every Thursday night to a sort of left-wing social club, and that's where she met Black women organizing for political action, a revolutionary Marxist group. This is when she's 8 years old. That elected Ron Dellums, the Marxist, to the Congress from the Bay Area, who then went on to serve on the Armed Services Committee while working for Cuba and the Communist government of Grenada at the time. And while she was in Montreal, her father had come back to the Bay Area. They were in Illinois, the family split. He went to Wisconsin, they went to Montreal. He then went back to the Bay Area because he was recruited to Stanford University as an affirmative action Marxist. A radical group on campus recruited him because they didn't have enough Marxists in the Stanford University economics department at the time. So he was the most prominent Marxist of the day, and they brought him in there. And
they were doing DEI affirmative action hiring
exactly.
them before it became cool.
Just as Kamala's doing now with Tim Walz. But that's right. That was a very early example of a DEI hire. But it wasn't because he was black, it was because he was red. That was the main criterion to bring him in there. So Kamala was always in these circles. But the Stanford connection is interesting. We'll get to that soon. That's where Steve Phillips comes in. Because Steve Phillips was a Maoist.
Don't start Steve yet. Only because I want to get the wrap here.
But he gave her a lot of entree into these circles. But carry on.
And what I want to know is, if we can tell, was Kamala using Willie Brown because of who he was and his connections, and willing to, establish a relationship with him to advance herself, or did he see her and highlight her and said, "That's the person I'm going to take to another level to use her for my purposes, which is to advance communist goals"? Or was it mutual? Did they see each other and say, we can help each other out here?
Look, I think they were both in the movement, and she saw, this is a man who can help me, and he probably thought, well, this is some eye candy for my arm, my arm candy for me, and she's a lefty like me, and what 60-year-old guy isn't going to be interested in the 29-year-old woman who comes onto him, 60-year-old single guy. So it's not hard to see how it might have happened. I'm sure there was a bit of romance, a bit of gold digging, a bit of political simpatico.
That's the part I'm interested in. Yeah, that's
I don't know.
Did she target him and say, I am going to use him to advance myself? Because again, the character of the individual. Now, we could say we already know about the character of Kamala Harris if she's a Marxist and a Maoist and a communist, but just did she start her political career, essentially using a 60-year-old man's vanity and, like you said, and playing to his ego and so on and so forth by being what he needed her to be, so that she could get this first foray into some bigger places. Because that tells us a lot about who might be our next president.
Oh, look, she is completely ambitious, but she was chosen, like Obama, for big things at an early age. She would have expected that her role is she is going to be a leader of the revolution. She would have known that since the teenage years. And Obama, when Obama left Hawaii and came to Chicago and New York, the networks were prepared for him. He just slotted straight in. And same with her. The networks have always been there for Kamala. See, this is what the communists do. They pick out promising young people of color who have left-wing backgrounds, communist parents, or whatever, and they do everything they can to promote them. And that might be to get them on the San Francisco school board. It might be to get them into a state rep's job or on the board of a big foundation. Or, like Kamala Harris, it might be to get them as high as they can take them. But it's not the talent of these people so much, it's their ethnic background and their ideology that determines how far they rise. Look, you got to say, if you run the left runs the Bay Area, they want people like Kamala Harris. They're their poster children, so they will open doors for her every way. If she'd been living in Kansas, she might have got elected to a school board. But she would not be where she is today. I can absolutely assure it, because the networks wouldn't have been there for her.
Well, now let's talk about who helped buy her to where she is today. You started to bring him up, and I asked you about him before. Steve Phillips. Tell us who he is in this backgrounder on Kamala's rise.
Well, he's actually a native of Cincinnati, Ohio, Steve Phillips. Grew up there, but he was educated as a lawyer in Stanford University in the 80s. Young black guy, was in the Black Students Union. He was also a member of the League of Revolutionary Struggle, a Maoist pro-China communist group, a leader of that. He was also the West Coast organizer for Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition in both 1984 and 1988, the West Coast student organizer. Now, he wouldn't have he would have been just another communist lawyer, but his girlfriend was, and his future wife was the daughter of, who just died recently of cancer, unfortunately, was the daughter of Herb and Marion Sandler. They were lefties who owned the Golden West Savings and Loan Company, one of the biggest savings and loans in the country. And they sold that to Wachovia Bank for $12 billion. And that they had so many subprime loans in it that Wachovia went bankrupt because of it. But anyway, they got $2 billion clear, and they invested that in the progressive movement. They started up Center for American Progress, ProPublica, and backed a whole bunch of candidates. And Steve Phillips became their representative to the Democratic Party and the social movements. So Steve Phillips helped to set up the Democracy Alliance in 2005. That is the alliance of left-wing billionaires, Soros, Tom Steyer, Norman Lear, a whole bunch of other people, who you have to put $200,000 a year into the movement to even belong to this. Okay, so he helped to set that up. And Steve Phillips also set up a group called Power Pack. And what he was doing was updating what he had learned in the Rainbow Coalition, the philosophy of the League of Revolutionary Struggle, to use the minority populations together with the progressive whites to create electoral minorities. So he understood that Jesse Jackson, when he ran and got second in the Democratic primary, minorities were 19% of the population at that point. Now they're pushing 40%. He understood, and he writes about this in his book, Brown is the New White, a New York Times bestseller, endorsed by Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi. He understood that if you can run progressive candidates of color, you can energize the white progressives and the progressives of color, the ever increasing number of progressives of color to form an electoral minority. Steve Phillips put $10 million behind Barack Obama in 2008 with a whole bunch of voter registration. 17 southern states did big voter registration drives to get Barack Obama ahead of Hillary Clinton in 2008. He made Obama. He also had Andrew Gillum on the board of Power Pack, and I think Stacey Abrams was also on the board of Power Pack, and he was Cory Booker's best friend at Stanford University, and is an open Marxist, Leninist, Maoist. Okay, he said that, and he still talks about that to this day. But he was also friends of Maya Harris, Kamala Harris's sister. They were in the same radical circles at Stanford together. He knew the Harris family. He knew Kamala Harris very well. He got Maya Harris's husband, Tony West, a job in the Eric Holder Justice Department, number 3 in the Justice Department under Eric Holder during the Obama administration. He also made sure, helped to fund Kamala Harris to get the district attorney's job in San Francisco, to get the attorney general's job in California, to get into the US Senate in California, and to get her on the Democrat ticket and into the White House. He has been behind her every single step of the way. He just wrote an op-ed in The Nation a week ago praising this wonderful woman. So he's her sugar daddy, and he's a Maoist, Marxist, steeped in pro-Chinese communism.
And how does he and his power and his money play into that of the other major power brokers? I mean, George Soros isn't a Maoist, is he? You mentioned Tom Steyer, you mentioned Norman Lee, you mentioned, we could sit here and list all of the biggest Democrat donors, not to mention the actual people in charge of the DNC. They all seem to have similar goals in terms of leftism, but not necessarily Maoists or Marxist.
No, like Tom Steyer definitely leans way to the left. He would be a Marxist. He was in the fringes of Marxism at Stanford University. This all comes back to Stanford. George Soros is definitely a Marxist. There's no question. Most of the Democracy Alliance guys are Marxists, but they tend to be more the old-fashioned, thing. It is Steve Phillips that has brought the Rainbow Coalition strategy into the Democracy Alliance and convinced them to start putting their money into the southern states where the minorities are. And you'll see the Democrats, they don't even care about their old white Midwesterners anymore. They're putting all their money into the southern states and using the Rainbow Coalition strategy. That's why Georgia is now nearly purple. That's why Arizona has 2 left-wing Democrat senators. That's why North Carolina is purple. That's why Virginia, and I can tell you how the Maoists took Virginia blue. That was a Maoist operation. And so the goal is they screwed it. See, there's factions within the communist movement in America. Like Hillary Clinton comes from one faction, and it was her turn to run in 2016. It was her turn. So they let her run. Because she'd been beaten by Obama, so let her run. And they really abandoned their Rainbow Coalition strategy. And she darn well lost. Against all expectations, she lost. So they've learned their lesson, and now they're going back to the Rainbow Coalition strategy. They are
so
running.
There was no way for them to use that strategy for a white woman like Hillary Clinton.
Well, they can.
They trying to associate with the marginalized, colors of that rainbow. Yeah.
Look, she is seen by a lot of minorities. Look, Barack Obama inspired minorities a lot more than Hillary Clinton would. Yes, there's a lot of women who wanted to see the first first female president, but There was a lot more people who wanted to see the first black president. you know, and there's a
But
lot of
but
people
when
that want
she
to
was
see.
running to be his 3rd term, though, she was gonna continue to build on, or did they not
Yeah.
believe she would build on everything that Obama did in the two
Oh,
terms?
look, absolutely. She was going to legalize every single illegal immigrant within 100 days. She would have done what Obama was doing, but she just wasn't quite as electable as Obama was. And
Right,
they underestimated Trump dramatically, and they paid the price for it. They couldn't believe it because they believed their own propaganda that everybody loves Democrats, you know. And so they were surprised by that. And they have done everything they can to sabotage Trump ever since and work. See, their goal now is this: they're trying to permanently flip the southern states, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Florida, and Texas. And in a couple of election cycles, they'll have all of those states, and then they only have to flip either Florida or Texas, and you can never elect another Republican president again, ever, because they will legalize 30 million illegal immigrants
right.
who will then vote 80% Democrat, and you have a one party state controlled by the Chinese. That's the communist plan for taking America.
The Chinese part is the key part. That's where I wanna go back to now. So, you mentioned, about Kamala in her younger years. She always seemed, no matter where she went, she found herself to, in the company of Marxists and Maoists and so forth. Even now, at age 59, the 2 most prominent people that she has chosen to cozy up to are her current husband, Doug Emhoff, who has extreme ties to Communist China, and
Yep.
she chose the running mate just this week, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who also has deep ties to Communist China. This cannot be a coincidence. Tell me about those 2 guys.
Well, Doug Emhoff is an entertainment lawyer, and I think, she probably targeted Doug, because fits a profile that would be useful for her. Look, I shouldn't say, there may have been just instant true love. I don't know. But the fact that his law firm deals extensively with China and has Chinese Communist Party members on his staff in America has got to tell you something about the man.
Not
This is
just hold on, just to make sure I heard that right. Not just Chinese immigrants to America working
no,
at Doug's law firm, Chinese communists specifically who know
Chinese
they're
Communist
members
Party
of the
members working in his law firm. Okay. Um, Doug Waltz, we've talked a lot about his Chinese ties, but he also has extensive ties to the Minnesota left, the Democratic Socialists of America Marxist movement. He was part of the Wellstone movement, which comes from Paul Wellstone, the senator who died in a plane crash. But he was a Marxist. Um, he was in the New American Movement, which is a pro-Chinese group, and they started a radical training school in his honor called Wellstone Action. Well, he learned his trade at Wellstone Action. His teacher, his trainer was Peggy Flanagan, who's now his lieutenant governor, and another one of the trainers was Keith Ellison, who's now his attorney general in Minnesota. The Wellstone Marxist mafia runs Minnesota. But on the Chinese front, you know, he joined the National Guard at 17. You think a young guy from Nebraska joins the National Guard at 17. He's a patriot, right? But by the time he was in his early 20s, he'd applied for a fellowship at Harvard to send him to China to train in a high school, to teach at a high school for a year, right when Tiananmen Square was going on. But despite that horror, he was back in China a few years later, started up a company funded by Communist China to bring about 20 delegations over 20 years, right up to 2005, of 30 to 60 young Minnesotan school kids every year to tour China, to imbibe the culture, the politics of China. And he told them not to emphasize their Americanness as it might offend their Chinese hosts. Now, if you're a military guy and you are teaching in China, you are of interest to the Chinese intelligence services. If they are giving you money and you're bringing dozens of young kids who can then be compromised or indoctrinated to China, you are absolutely of interest to the Chinese intelligence services. And then he serves on the Armed Services Committee of the House, overseeing the US military, while still regularly going back to China. And when Trump was trying to cut trade with China, he was actively exploiting the agricultural trade of Minnesota to try and say, to propagandize against Trump's initiatives. He has apologized for China at every single step of the way. He honeymooned in China, choosing the date of the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. He calls us weird, you know, this guy. But he also, in 2019, he keynoted an event in Minnesota put on by the U.S.-China Friendship Association. That is an old Communist Party front set up by the Maoists in the 1970s to propagandize for Communist China in this country. And it was all about, he was there all about trying to keep the trade going, keep the trade going, while Trump was trying to stop the trade. But the person who spoke next to him was Li Zhaolin, the Chinese leader of the Chinese Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. That's the Chinese Communist Party's top body for influencing foreign countries. She is the daughter of a former Chinese president under Deng Xiaoping and a leader of the Chinese Consultative Committee Conference, the leading Chinese Communist Party body that oversees foreign propaganda. So he was talking alongside Chinese royalty, Chinese Communist Party royalty. And they must be super excited that this man who has loved their country like a chocolate for years is now poised to become number 2 in the US under number 1, who has hung around with China lovers her entire life, from before she was born, you know.
Yeah, from childhood anyway. But yeah, I guess you could go that way because of the way her parents were when they met in the 60s, as you said. So you predicted, when you did the video that drew me to wanting to talk to you, you predicted that Joe Biden would not finish his first term, and you're pretty much right. And I think you said something about you lost a lot of steak dinners on Kamala not being the nominee in 2020, but now you're back to collect them, because you did say he wouldn't finish. And even though he hasn't retired or resigned the position, by passing the baton for reelection off to her, he's just on the beach in Rehoboth. He pretty much is done, isn't he?
Oh, look, he's nothing now. But this is what I was saying in 2017. I was saying Kamala Harris would be on the ticket in 2020 for the Democrats, probably at the top. And a lot of people laughed because she was so unpopular even then. A lot of the black communities I talked to laughed. They thought, we're never going to go for that woman, you know. But I said, look, it's not a popularity. She is the chosen one. She's been chosen by Steve Phillips and his people, the people who put Obama in office, to be the second Obama. It's a done deal. They're going to do it. Now, she ran and she flamed out so spectacularly that she had to leave the contest. So I thought, oh, well, I got that one wrong. Well, okay. So who's left? Bernie Sanders is left, and he's running away with it. And Joe Biden's just lost 4 primaries in a row. He's out of it. He's gone. He's toast. But South Carolina was coming up. And see, Bernie's a communist, but he's not in the same faction. He's more in the Democratic Socialist Communist Party USA faction. So he was sort of outside their control a little bit. And so they prevailed on Jim Clyburn, the black congressman from South Carolina, to call out the black population of South Carolina to vote for Joe Biden in that South Carolina primary. And they beat it. Joe Biden beat Bernie Sanders. That ended Bernie Sanders' run. Okay. And Joe Biden ran away with it from that point. And as soon as then Joe put Kamala on the VP ticket, as sort of, I knew they'd get her in there somewhere. And so they ran as a team.
He promised? I'm sorry, is that what he promised Clyburn? Did he
I,
promise?
I am pretty sure. I don't know, but I would have to be very suspicious that was what was the deal. I'm sure that would have been that. See, Clyburn is very much involved in the hard left. He went to Cuba in 2000 and helped to negotiate a deal for 140 young American radicals to do 7-year medical training courses in Cuba, sons and daughters of Communist Party members. And Jim Clyburn was part of that, as was Benny Thompson, the subsequent head of the Homeland Security Committee, who put a whole bunch of people in jail, for an insurrection.
Yeah.
But see, and the other part of it was the Chinese Progressive Association which works completely with the Chinese consulate in San Francisco, has a network of voter registration organizations in key swing states. They have Lucha in Arizona, Pennsylvania Stands Up in Pennsylvania, Detroit Action in Michigan, New Georgia Project in Georgia, Florida Rising in Florida, Black Leaders Organizing Communities in Wisconsin. They claim by using Black Lives Matter activists in the inner cities to get out the vote, they claim they won 6 of the 7 key swing states they targeted for Biden-Harris. This organization is directly connected to the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. So she had help. The Biden-Harris ticket had Chinese help, not necessarily Chinese money, but pro-Chinese communists running big voter registration organizations in the inner cities of the 6 key states that gave Biden so-called the election.
Why did you know this and none of the Republicans, nobody in the RNC did, nobody in the media did? Because all we heard in 2016 was that Trump was getting aid from the Russians, the Russian collusion hoax, that he's an asset and they're helping to get him elected in every way that they can. You're literally saying the Chinese did exactly that same thing for Biden and Harris, and nobody talked about it.
Oh, way bigger than this was directly on the ground. I'll give you an example of Virginia in a minute. But okay, who was one of the big guys who was going on about the Trump-Russia collusion? And I have no doubt that the Russians did try and get in there where they could.
Adam Schiff was the one I would say is probably.
Adam Schiff. Okay, Adam Schiff has gone on about Russia collusion,
Yeah.
while having a 10-year relationship with the Committee of 100, Communist China's main influence operation in the country, working with top Chinese Communist Party officials, going to their events. Nobody called him on this. The Committee of 100 is Communist China's main influence operation in the country. And he was intimately involved in it, calling out Trump for his Russia collusion. The communists, this is what they do, accuse others of what you're doing yourself. And I'd love to give an example.
Why does nobody else know that, Trevor, is what I want to know. I believe every word you're saying, and you can document it and you bring the receipts, but I'm just saying this is unknown to most conservatives. I do a talk radio show and I talk to conservatives all over the country, and nobody is talking about that Chinese communist tie to all of these individuals.
Well, look, Peter Schweitzer.
Other than Eric Swalwell, the California congressman was sleeping with the Chinese spy.
There's a lot more to that story. But look, Peter Schweitzer, in his recent book on China, followed up a lot of my information on this. He wrote a lot about it. He followed my leads and did a lot about this. I wrote many articles for Epoch Times about this that got a lot of coverage. I did videos on this that got a lot of coverage. But the Republican Party just doesn't want to go there.
No,
they don't. They would rather lose. Look, look, Trump will call out communism, but he hasn't really been briefed on the intricacies of it. But the other guys, you've got a lot of Republicans, you've got to remember, a lot of Republicans like Mitch McConnell have been sucking off the Chinese teat for a long, long time. So they have an interest in keeping the China thing undercover too. But I'd love to give an example of one state that the Chinese absolutely flipped. And it'd be quite shy. Okay, Virginia, right? Red, ruby red state, 15 years ago. Southern Republican conservative state. 2008, they went for Obama. Big shock. They went steadily purple ever since. Now they're pretty much blue. They went a little bit red a cycle ago, then went blue again. They have a Republican governor, but we don't know how long he will last. And I've warned, Len Youngkin must know about this because I've written so much about this and made videos on it. In 2005, the Liberation Road Communist Group, the pro-Chinese group that is connected to the Chinese consulate and invented Black Lives Matter, created Black Lives Matter, they set up a voter registration organization in Northern Virginia called New Virginia Majority. And they wore orange T-shirts, just like Acorn. I think many of them were ex-Acorn people. And they went out there and they signed up 300,000 minority voters in Northern Virginia over about 5 years. Then they worked with Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, who personally wrote 200,000 pardons for Virginia felons so they could vote too. He had to write 200,000 individual pardons because it was against the Virginia Constitution. That 500,000 voting base is what they used to flip Virginia by registering, signing up these people, getting to the polls. Now, the reason they're so effective, they were using GIS computerized maps. These maps could identify every precinct in the state, the ethnicities, the income levels, the voting patterns, so they could send the right volunteers into the right neighborhoods, Iranians into Iranian neighborhoods, Puerto Ricans into Puerto Rican neighborhoods. Those maps were made and still are being made on contract by a Liberation Road communist called Steve McClure, a graduate of the George Mason University Geography Department, who makes those maps working out of the Geography Department of Wuhan University, China. So he is using Chinese computers, Chinese equipment to make maps to flip districts in Virginia. And the same network has groups in North Carolina, in Georgia, in Florida, in Tennessee, Ohio, called Ohio Organizing Collaborative, and many other places around the country. So you got to understand, look, recently a top Chinese academic about 3 years ago said our goal is to have organizations in every American state that can influence the elections in every state without doing it, and it's under our noses. But you think about it from Xi Jinping's point of view. You want to take down America. You could do big trade wars, but that's really risky, might cost you a lot of money. You can start a shooting war before you are ready, or you can fund Black Lives Matter. You can organize Black Lives Matter, organize a pandemic, and then basically organize big voter registration organizations in the key swing states to energize the minorities who've been fired up by Black Lives Matter, to energize the inner city ethnic populations to vote for the Democratic candidates. What would you do? What would you do if you were Xi Jinping?
Yeah, well, no question about it. And so what you're saying, or I'll ask you, is what you're saying that there's no chance in November to stop this?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not
well,
saying that at all.
Well, okay. What are you saying? Because what the picture you're painting, particularly with all of those states that you just mentioned, is very, very disconcerting if you are concerned. Yeah. And I don't even, this doesn't even have to be Republican, Democrat anymore. This is, capitalist, freedom-loving American against
most Democrats should be worried about this. Most Democrats do not want a one-party state. They know what that would bring. But
most Democrats aren't the ones in power. The ones that are in power are the ones is the few. Is the few
that's right.
Yeah.
Who do believe in this. This is what I'll say. One of the other reasons they hate Trump so much is because he has been able to energize the Latino and Black base far more effectively than any previous Republican candidate. He is eroding the Rainbow Coalition strategy. He is eroding it very seriously. And so they understand they've probably got one chance left, because if he gets back in and we see upward mobility amongst the Black and Latino communities. We see the border sealed, so Black kids don't have to compete with illegal labor. When people get into the middle class, that rainbow coalition strategy starts to go away. It starts to crumble, and and so they see they've got one last shot at this.
Well, and they put all of their eggs in the Kamala Harris basket, which is really interesting because you obviously clarified how she is supposed to be, the next Obama, the successor, if you will. The big difference being Obama was likable. Obama
Yeah.
was intelligent. Kamala Harris is utterly unlikable as far as I can see, and is the furthest thing from intelligent. It's the
Oh no,
reason why when she ran in 2019, she had a massive pile of money and a bunch of support in January. And by December, once people got to hear her and got to know her, the money was gone and the support was gone. She went from 20 some percent to 2% because people got to hear that this woman doesn't have it. She doesn't get it. And I feel like that's what that
yeah.
I hope is what happens here.
Well, but don't you know she's nicer than Taylor Swift and she's smarter than Oprah Winfrey? This is she's not going to. I'm surprised she's even debating Trump. I'll believe that when I see it. She is just a suit. She's just a face. She is just a media puppet. So I think really Obama wanted to choose someone else. I think he had his eye on Gretchen Whitmer or someone like that. But I think Joe Biden, as a final finger to the people who shafted him, said, I'm going to endorse Kamala because they really don't want her now. She was supposed to be the one. And but she was so embarrassing to them. I think by the time the cycle had come around, they really would have gone for someone else if they could have. But
why didn't they try to balance her out with a moderate running mate? Why did they go with somebody who's as radical and Chinese Marxist, communist, Maoist as Tim Walz?
Well, because I think they don't realize that people know this about Tim Walz. He's an affirmative action old white man, And look, Josh Shapiro, I thought would have been the logical guy, but being Jewish and pro-Israel, he would have inflamed the left-wing, pro-Hamas, communist, Black Lives Matter base that Kamala Harris relies on to get elected. So she couldn't really go for him. Mark Kelly is just about as bad at Chinese and Iranian connections as Tim Walz does, and they're even better known. So they were sort of a bit low on options. Gavin Newsom would have carried a whole bunch of problems as well. So I thought, that we'll go for somebody inoffensive, and they didn't realize that people would so quickly dig up his radical background.
Did Mayor Pete ever have a chance in that little sweepstakes?
Well, I think he was considered. Yeah, but he's a Marxist. He's a Marxist as well. A Gramsciist.
He keeps the Rainbow Coalition in place.
And look, I'm sure he was considered, but I don't think he would have been. I think Tim Walz, they thought he would appeal to more the moderate Democrat base and maybe a few moderate Republicans than Little Pete would have. I don't know what all the considerations were, but they settled on Walsh, and they didn't have a very good field, but I think he's fully aligned with her philosophically, so there won't be any problems there. But he's not, he's got a military background, she's got a prosecutor's background. You think, wow, they're probably a little bit conservative. No, they're not. They're not even close. This is, as many people have said, this is the most radical ticket ever put before the United States people.
No question.
By far, no question.
Last question for you, Trevor, in our time here. Why not Michelle? Given everything, the story you just told about Barack and his radicalization and his background and so on and so forth, so many people said she would be the one. She's better spoken than Kamala. She is obviously would bring Barack with her to the White House and to the Oval Office again. So many people said she would be the X factor. The Republicans would never have a chance. But she didn't do it. Why?
I'll say the blunt answer. I think she's too lazy. She's got a very comfortable life. She's got all the money she'll ever want. She's got a good existence. She's well regarded. She's on the cover of magazines. Why would she want to blow that and go through all the agony? I'm sure the Democrats would have loved to have her. Absolutely. I just think she's too darn lazy. She just didn't want to do it. And I can sort of understand that, the grief you'd go through running through that and 4 years of it. She could only lose public esteem by doing it, because public esteem is quite high now.
You could say the same thing about Barack, though. I'm living a great life. I've did my 2 terms. I'm regarded as a saint in my party. I have everything I could ever want. I'm building another beach house on a beach that is supposedly going to be overrun by the rising of the oceans that we were telling everybody about. But I'm living the life, and yet he's still in this thing neck deep. Running Biden from behind
because
the
he's
scenes.
an ideologically driven.
Some people, I guess, don't want to give up the life, do they?
No, well, look, Barack Obama is driven, but he's an ideological communist, just like Kamala Harris is. He was the real president when Biden was in office, and he'll be the real president when Kamala's in office. Well, him and Xi Jinping will be the real presidents. But, so if you look from Obama's point of view, maybe he could have strong-armed, but I don't think anybody's going to strong-arm Michelle, But, who would you rather have? If you were Barack Obama, would you rather try and boss around Kamala Harris or boss around your own wife?
Well, I get that. For me, and I could be wrong about this. I have always seen Barack and Michelle as being, we are the president. That we were the president, for 8 years already, and will be them again. I didn't think it would be a boss around thing. I just don't think they disagree on very much. I think they would all be like,
yeah, maybe that's right, but I think that would have just created a lot of problems. I think she didn't want to do it.
Yeah. Clearly, and she said it again and again. A lot of people thought it was a ruse. She was going to just spring it on people late, but she was.
Look, maybe she'll parachute into the convention, and no, Kamala's got all the delegates now. But look, it was left. I think they really would have didn't really want Kamala. Wiser heads prevailed. They saw that she wasn't really the person to carry it through their strategy, but Joe hung on so darn long because I think he didn't want to go to jail. And I'd love to see the severance package he got, from the Democratic Party for bowing out. And I think his final finger to the people who shafted him, as I said, was, well, I'm going to endorse Kamala. That just settles it. You can forget all the others, box them in. But, so it doesn't always go just according to plan for these people. But I think I can prove, and if people get my book, they can see that I lay out everything I've said with visuals, with references, with articles from the Stanford Daily, with you name it, like documents that people have never seen before, that have never been out in the public. And I hope people will look at it, and I hope the Republicans will use this, especially lower level Republicans. Read my book, get on social media, get on talkback shows, and blast this stuff out. The video I did that you saw, I got 640,000 views on that so far. Another woman got 2.4 million. I think it's been seen by 4 to 5 million people so far. That's a significant number.
Yeah, and that's why I want to share it. That's the reason we're talking right now. It's the reason you've been on my radio program. I'm trying to get that in front of as many people as possible, as well as this broadcast that we are doing right now. I'll tell everybody, make sure you follow Trevor online. As you can see there, Trevor Loudon 1 is his Twitter. Go to trevorloudon.com, right? trevorloudon.com.
Yeah, trevorloudon.com is where you can order my books, get a signed copy, pre-order a signed copy. And I've got a whole range of other books too. Got a great articles on Sherrod Brown, I'll tell you. Deeply into the Communist Party, that man. And so I've got
a conversation to have then.
We could have a whole show on him. Yeah. But I've got security risk senators, all about the senators, House Un-Americans. I got a lot of stuff on your Marxist congressmen and senators, on Obama, but Kamala Harris, she's the icing on the cake. So trevorloudon.com, Kamala Harris's Communist Roots.
That's the book to get. You can pre-order it now. Trevor Loudon has done his homework. He is bringing the facts and bringing the receipts all the way through. Trevor, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it.
Oh, look, always a pleasure, Bob. Thanks so much, and anytime.
Thank you. All right, that's going to do it for Strictly Speaking today. I know this one has value because we are coming up on an election. I don't care when you're watching this, this is going to be important. Share this with other people in your platforms and in your social circles, and we'll see you next time right here on Strictly Speaking.